Hey, hey, hey.
Hello.
Yeah, man, this show is getting some legs.
Yeah.
People are watching it,
Mhm.
and the numbers are growing, and across the platforms too. And Rumble, YouTube, Twitter now.
Mhm.
It's very cool. People are talking about it, and people want to be on it too. Special guests after they saw a couple people after they saw Sam Husseini asked me to come on. So, yeah, we're gonna be doing this, man.
Mhm.
But I love this show.
Yeah, same. There's
Took me a
always
while. Took me a while to get used to the format and to doing a live news show, and which I'd never done before, except
Mhm.
like I had done it on cable news years ago, but nothing like this. But now I look forward to it.
nice. Yeah. There's a lot of people every week there's somebody new who says, "Wow, this is the highlight of my week." So that's always heartwarming to see.
I know. Yeah, no, the comments have been awesome, like across the board, pretty much on these on the YouTube comments, which aren't always the best, but
Yeah.
in this case they are. These are we have the only smart YouTube commenters. I'm just saying.
Mhm.
Um, but yeah, no. And this week we have too much to cover. There's a lot. I don't know what it is. I can't remember a week like this when we've had so many topics that I wanted to talk about.
Mhm.
There's like at least 7. So we should try to move with alacrity
Yeah.
through the news cycle here. But and maybe dispense with our normal long introductory monologue about Black people.
About black. Yeah.
Well, I mean, we will have opportunity.
No.
Don't despair. Don't despair. I mean, the news was about Black people.
Mhm.
Thank God. So we do have stuff to talk about. And we might go the whole show without talking about Ukraine, which would be another bizarre thing. This is the Ukraine and Black people show. I don't know if you
Mhm.
guys knew that, but we are the best at covering those two topics.
Yeah.
And if you ever hear about Black people in Ukraine, let us know.
Yeah. We're big in Somalia and Belarus.
You know, it's funny. I know a guy who's the product of a Ukrainian being inside of a Black person, but that's a different story. Okay, let's move on. Shout out to
Usually,
Jason.
usually it's the other way around.
That's right. That's right. Yeah. Hope Jason's doing well. I'm sure he's watching.
Yeah. He always sends me pictures whenever he goes out to a concert and asks me what I think of the conga player. So it's fun.
Yeah. All right. What do we do first, man? There's so much going on. The world is burning.
You want
France is burning. Should we start there?
France is burning. We can start there. Yeah.
Okay. France is burning. Next.
I know, right? It happens every week, but this time it's burning for real. It's funny following news stories on Twitter in that like you get the spin first and then you have to dig out the actual story from underneath it. But for right-wing Twitter, this was Michelle Houellebecq was right week.
Yeah. Here you go again, Mr. Foreign Policy talking again, but it's true. Like any story having to do with foreign policy of the United States or any NATO country, you can assume that the coverage will be straight propaganda and will be delivered from the CIA, basically. And I'm not exaggerating. This has become abundantly clear to me that not all of the news media, but those portions of the news media are essentially controlled by the intelligence agencies and probably the State Department too. So yeah, about France, the reporting has been pretty quiet. These are maybe the biggest riots in the world going on, and for a long time, France, as you said, has had sort of weekly riots for several years. Beginning with the yellow vests, my favorites, who got out there and whooped some cop ass over increasing gas taxes. And to combat climate change, Mr. Macron tried that and got his ass kicked. And then they tried to reduce pensions, undemocratically, and got his ass kicked, or many cops got their ass kicked for that.
Well, we brought this up before. A big thing about the yellow vest thing is that's another protest, kind of like the Hong Kong protests and the protests in Spain that were conveniently ended by the lockdowns.
I have new intelligence on the Hong Kong protests. It has come to my attention that almost certainly at least a substantial portion of those protests were in fact organized by the United States, by the National Endowment for Democracy and USAID, which are the two regime change outfits funded by the US.
Those are the people who propped up Pussy Riot?
Yes. Pussy Riot is their creation. Yeah. And I used to fall for that stuff. I thought Hong Kong was legit and authentic. Oh, I had a little bit of a weird whiff to it, but like I didn't know better. I thought it was a legitimate popular uprising. And I'm sure a lot of it was, by the way. I'm not saying no one in Hong Kong opposes the CCP. I know that much of that was totally legitimate, but the CIA working through the NED and the USAID apparently had a lot to do with it. And also, by the way, not to mention, I also found out Tiananmen Square. I didn't know this. 1989. It looks like our spooks had a lot to do with that too. And a lot of the story that I have always assumed was true is bullshit. Yeah, everybody go look up Tiananmen Square. There's a guy named Carl Zha who has a cool podcast, ZHA, Chinese American. I think he was born in China, and he does a whole lot of revisionist history. But there's a bunch of this. There's a bunch on this. If you look up what actually happened in 1989 around Tiananmen Square, it's very unlike what we were told. Military did a lot less killing and maybe possibly no killing, actually. But the main thing is that the protests that led up to it, the so-called massacre, were almost definitely organized and led by people working with the United States. So it was a deliberately provocative action, the Tiananmen Square protests that were incited and organized by elements working for the United States of America. I mean, it's amazing. As I said, I've been studying this stuff for decades, and I've only hung out with people who are super cynical about the CIA. I never, ever thought it was to this extent. I did not understand how much they've controlled within the media since the 1950s, beginning with Operation Mockingbird, which I don't know, they might still call it that. Whatever they call it, they're still doing what Operation Mockingbird was, which was to control the media on questions of national security.
Well, one of Obama's defense authorization acts sort of made it legal to where you don't even need an Operation Mockingbird, to where the state can just do straight up propaganda directly, right?
Correct.
Yeah.
And my good friend Matt Welch was just on CNN yelling about this. What is most disturbing, because governments do this. This is nothing new. Every government tries to do this. Every government is hostile to free speech in some way or another. What is most disturbing is that I'm not going to say some journalists. I'm not even going to say most journalists in this country. I'm going to say the overwhelming number of journalists in this country are basically opposed to the First Amendment. I mean, they want the government to control much of the media. This is what and this is our next topic, the Dowdy decision, right? This whole uproar about this wonderful judge in Louisiana. I don't know his first name. Judge Doughty of the circuit court there, who has ruled that it is unconstitutional and illegal for the government to essentially have any contact at all, with a few exceptions, like for national emergencies and stuff, basically having no contact at all with social media companies. Which to me is, if the First Amendment is about anything, it's about that. And of course, all the liberals are saying, oh, what's the big deal? The government was just asking Twitter to take down posts and ban users. It was just asking. And a lot of commentators, I don't know if you're going to show this, but Walter Isaacson, he's a professional historian, sort of a very liberal establishment historian, has done a lot of huge biographies of presidents and Abraham and Ben Franklin, et cetera. He was on, I think it was CNN or MSNBC, one of them, saying the government has First Amendment rights too. We can't stop the government from speaking. That's what this is. I mean, I couldn't believe it. This is a guy who knows American history. So this is the problem. The journalist class, I would say, the class as a whole in this country and in the UK want the government not only to abrogate the First Amendment, but to go farther. And as I said, directly control what is being said on certain issues, certain topics, foreign policy, and anything involving state security, national defense. There is no journalism. I mean, within the mainstream, all the journalism, the real journalism about those issues are outside the mainstream. You're just simply, and this, you see this with the Ukraine war too. I mean, the ignorance of like very sophisticated, otherwise highly educated political people. I mean, I've seen like libertarian, I'm not going to name them because they're good friends of mine and they're really great, but like libertarian journalists who are professional journalists who do nothing but write against the United States government. They didn't know anything about Prigozhin. They didn't know anything about the counteroffensive. They didn't know. They thought that, the Ukraine's been keeping all of its weapons and they're gonna launch this big counteroffensive later. This is just a big feint. They think that Russia's been losing the war. I mean, it's incredible. And I can also think of a major left-wing journalist who said exactly the same thing, who's also a friend of mine. I'm not going to name him, but and it's not because they're bad or stupid. It's because they watch the mainstream media too much on this. And I'm telling you, it's gotten to the point where you really shouldn't, except selectively, article by article, maybe that you see on Twitter, but don't just pick up the New York Times and start reading. That's what I did for 20 years. Mm-hmm. If you do that now, you're going to have no idea why Russia's about to wipe Ukraine off the map. I mean, you would have no idea. And then with COVID, I mean, you would have no idea that ivermectin has been effective. You would only know that it's horse-paste and that this jackass named Joe Rogan took it. Mm-hmm. But journalists,
yeah,
and academics, by the way, they're also in league, and you'll see that MSNBC and CNN, especially MSNBC, have a lot of left-wing professors on. So there's a real merger of the media class, the establishment media class, and the academic class, all of whom singing exactly the same tune.
They see themselves as gatekeepers explicitly. Like they see themselves as a priestly gatekeeper class who are the guardians of the truth. And they resent regular citizens who go out and do journalism or academia themselves.
Yeah. They think of most Americans as Lauren Boebert. Like if they don't keep the lid on these peasants, they're going to elect these jackasses like Lauren Boebert, right? Mm-hmm. And of course, half of what rankles them about Lauren Boebert is the way she dresses and wears makeup. I'm not kidding, but no, they also genuinely don't like her policy proposals either. So the journalist class in this country is almost fully Sovietized, I would say. They are behaving almost, I mean, it is, because there is no mainstream media platform. Even Fox is now in the fold. That is at all critical of U.S. foreign policy. Like, I mean, so, and they all say what the State Department says about Ukraine.
Yeah. Well, that was the joke during the Cold War is, what's the difference between the United States and the Soviet Union? The people in the United States believe their propaganda.
Man, I know. I remember back I was at this like left-wing circus festival called the Bread and Puppets Festival in Vermont. I mean, this is like the most lefty, crunchy, hippie thing in the world. And there was a guy there, I remember that, who said that. And he said, people in the Soviet Union actually know the news better than Americans because they learned to read between the lines. And I laughed at him, and I was like, get out of here, commie. Like, what are you talking about? I was a socialist, but I thought that America certainly was freer.
That sounds like the New York Times piece where people in the Soviet Union had better sex because they were starving and they were skinnier or something.
Right. Which every communist in Brooklyn just loved, man. They loved that article. They passed it around like mad for weeks. Probably jerked off to it. But yeah, so no, but he was right. He was right maybe even then, because that was in the 80s like the early 80s, I think. That was when, it was still just the three networks and PBS giving us all the news. Mm-hmm. I mean, that was pretty Soviet. My childhood, in terms of news dissemination and news analysis, totally Soviet. It was just the other side of it. I mean, so in Soviet media, in Pravda, you would hear socialism every other sentence, the word socialism. In the American media, until the 1990s or even 2000s, I remember, because I was a socialist, and we all were always upset that you never heard any mention of the word socialism. I mean, it was really on lockdown. And that's where we are now within the mainstream media. There's only one tiny little massive giant world-changing difference, which is the advent of the internet. And now game's on, game's over, genie's out of the bottle. It's a battle. There's a war going on. It is an epistemological battle. I mean, it's a battle over what is true, what is real, right? They actually count things differently than I do. They actually have different metrics in mind. I mean, they think that way more people died from COVID than I do, for instance. They think that the Russian military is on the verge of collapse and has, sustained X number of casualties and lost this many tanks. And it's like, no, they're actually bigger and stronger now. So, and it's a shame when I see people who are kind of on our side have like still 1 foot in the establishment. And I would say that's true about those people I was talking about, who certainly they don't get the main points about Ukraine, and miss a lot of other stuff too. So
they'll get it 5 years from now when it doesn't matter.
Yeah, right. Exactly. Right. Yeah. And then 5 years from now is when we're going to hear, "Oh, I'm so sorry. Ivermectin was a good idea." Yeah. And no one will care. That's how they do it. Yeah. It's like, we tried to assassinate all these foreign leaders, but that was 20 years ago. So it's all good. No one cares. I mean,
so before we move on to the Dowdy decision, the reason why I brought up the riots in France is, the dissident right is saying that this is the chickens coming home to roost for, decades of liberalism and open migration into France, especially, and that all these Muslim African migrants are just completely incompatible with France, and they're just getting what they deserve.
It's an interesting place, and I was there 5 years ago, and that's what I noticed most of all. I was there in the 1980s, late 80s, and then again just 5 years ago. And the main difference I noticed was how black and brown it was. And I was in Paris then. Paris is like, it seemed to be similar to New York in terms of its demographics, in terms of its non-white population, maybe even more non-white. It's remarkable. That was the first thing. The second thing I noticed, and it was really clear to me, and I was there for like 4 days, and I was on the street a lot, so I kind of just saw lots and lots and lots of people. They're very assimilated, actually, even though, the story about these riots is that it's caused by a lack of assimilation among the black and brown, the Arab and African immigrants there. It's not what I saw. I saw black Africans and brown Arabs dressing exactly like white French people. And then, as far as I know, if they were born in France, their accents are on point because they're forced to. See, France has this thing, which we don't do, which is very interesting. They actually do coercive assimilation. We don't do that. We don't force immigrants anymore. We kind of did early in the 20th century to assimilate, but now we don't. They just have to take that test, which very few Americans can pass, about like American history and politics and the Constitution. If you pass that test, you'll get in. In France, it is illegal, I believe, still to wear a burqa. They've gone hard in many ways. There's been all sorts of coercive measures taken against Islam in particular. There is open legal discrimination, I believe, in hiring and firing and other things in France against Muslims. Muslims in France do not have the same rights as Catholics. And this, is, yes, I think that's part. Who knows what the cause was exactly, other than this kid getting shot. Yeah. But they force assimilation because why is this? And I need every lefty to think about this and think hard about this. Why is France so coercive in its assimilationist measures? Why does it force people there to be French culturally? Because they are famously, and have been since the 1780s, committed to this thing called égalité, equality. If your mission, if your objective as a society is to become as egalitarian as possible, then you're going to have to get everybody into the same culture, because it's very hard to see equality between people who practice very different forms of culture. They just look so different, you can't compare them, right? So that's why all the great liberals and socialists of the last 100 or so years have called for extreme coercive assimilationist measures, because that brings faster equality. If you think about Mao's China, think about the pictures we saw of people in Mao's China. What do you think of? You think of like those huge like stadiums full of regular citizens, all dressed in exactly the same garb and all doing calisthenics at exactly the same time in unison, right? That's an assimilation to one national culture. That's what the left has always been about. And that's why France does that, because France is a much more left-wing country politically. And so that's why this is what people don't understand. If those kids in the streets are throwing rocks and burning down buildings because of the discrimination against Islam in France, they're throwing rocks against liberalism. Liberalism, what we think of as liberalism or progressivism, which is also the dominant ideology of France. That's the French national politics, is that kind of liberalism, that egalitarian liberal. So they're fighting against what the liberals are trying to do to them. Don't make this about the right wing being racist. I don't think that's true. I think it's about the good progressive egalitarians in France forcing their culture on those people as the price of admission to the country after having invaded and occupied and colonized their countries, by the way. And I don't understand the right wing critique of that whole thing. It's like, wait, you're mad at them for migrating to this country that invaded them and conquered them and made them a part of France, like Algeria?
Exactly.
Like where that kid is from. Algeria was part of France for about a century. I mean, it was officially a part of France. The map of France included Algeria in it. You're mad at that kid and his family for moving to Paris because why? Because they're not naturally French. Mbappe, their big soccer star, the football star, his parents are from Cameroon and Nigeria, I think, or Cameroon and forget the other one. Oh, no, Algeria. That's right, Algeria and Cameroon. And there's the right wing on Twitter was going on and on and on about how he's not really French, and he can never be French. And no black person can be French. And I understand that in its original conception, the Frenchman was a white man. Sure, I get it. But like, that's not the thing. They don't understand French politics. French politics has this profound egalitarian streak in it that says very clearly, not only can you assimilate into being just like us white people, you will assimilate, and we'll make you assimilate. We will get rid of your culture.
I mean, it's like saying Hawaiians aren't Americans, you know?
No, it's like saying Hawaiians can never become Americans, and they're racially not right. Exactly. Because America also was founded, guess what? On a similar thesis. You know, that I would say by the end of the Civil War, America was founded on this thesis that not only can black people and other people become just like whites, you know, they should be encouraged to. The grand assimilationism of liberalism is wreaking havoc. The chickens are coming home to roost, as Malcolm X said.
Yeah. So Alexander Dugin recently posted this thread that, you know, on its face might be a little incoherent or just out of the blue, where he talks about, this is the Russian philosopher talking about Islamic banking in Russia being a great idea. So he's signaling that there is this unity of thought between the Orthodox and the Muslims in their practices. And if you follow him on Twitter, he's constantly tweeting out, articles about how Russia and Turkey and Iran are strengthening their alliances. And the giant geopolitical shift that's happening here is that, you know, the Muslims that we thought should assimilate into the NATO side are actually joining BRICS and potentially might be allies for the Russian side.
Yep. Iran just joined the Shanghai Cooperative Organization, which is the military alliance led by Russia. More countries have joined BRICS since we last talked about it. But so Alexander Dugin's thing here, he's calling for the introduction of Islamic banking practices into Russia. And at the center of this is the fact that within Islamic banking, allegedly, I don't know anything about Islamic banking, believe it or not an expert there, but I'll believe Alexander in this one. Usury is not allowed, which is famously also not allowed in the Bible. And so this is where Muslims and Christians come together, and in particular, Orthodox Christians like Alexander Dugin. And by the way, let me say something really quick right here. If every Christian in the world converted to Orthodoxy, we would have world peace. But what Alexander Dugin is saying, because and Dugin is a great example of this.
Trad Russell.
What's that?
Trad Russell out here.
Yeah, well, what I don't want is, I don't necessarily want non-Christians to convert to Orthodox Christianity, but I definitely want people who are already Christians to go there because they're not evangelical. And also I think they're just much truer to the text as I read it than most other Christians. And I like a lot of, I like the incense too. And the beards are cool. Icons are great. So Alexander Dugin, right? He's seeing this amazing, or I should say, this is an amazing moment of Alexander Dugin, the great Russian nationalist, saying, oh, we should import like major portions of this other foreign alien culture. This is all part of his grand strategy, Dugin's, to create what is now being created, the Grand Eurasian Alliance of Russia, led by Russia and China, but which will oversee the entire landmass of Eurasia and thereby become a major power in the world. And no longer, most importantly, this is for Alexander because he fucking hates the liberal imperialists as much as I do, no longer at the whims of these liberal progressive imperialists who have wreaked havoc on the nations of Russia and China over centuries. So
yeah,
I support them in that. But yeah, that's what he's about. He's about bringing together, and Iran and Russia have been getting closer and closer and closer and closer and closer. Syria and Russia, closer and closer, right? I mean, they're allies. They're formal allies at this point. So it's happening. The United States, everybody, is being kicked out. And look at Afghanistan. The United States is being kicked out of Eurasia. Saudi Arabia is part of BRICS now, basically. I mean, they got no place to camp in the desert anymore. No more Desert Storm or Desert Shield for you guys. You're going to have to put away your light brown uniforms. Your desert camo. It's got to go, man. Sorry. But, hopefully they don't end up wearing the camo of the Ukrainian forces, because that's the only place or Taiwanese forces. But
yeah, a lot of the racialists and the frog Twitter people are stuck in 2015 on this issue and need to evolve their thinking on Muslims.
Well, they should read the Quran. So I think I've said this here. When I taught the Great Books course at Columbia, I had to teach the Quran, and I was like, what the hell? This is going to be boring, or it's going to be stupid. I love the Quran, and it's fascinating. It's not what you think it is in there. And I guarantee you, if you read the whole Quran and you've read the Bible and you have to choose among the three major religions, one of them, I guarantee you, if you're watching this show, you would be with me and you would become a Muslim. Because I'm telling you, it's like if you have anything remotely like my sensibilities or politics, you're going to choose, of the three, you're going to choose the Quran. It allows for retribution against one's enemies, which is all about kicking out invaders, colonizers. It's an anti-colonial text. It's the original anti-colonial text. It's all about self-determination. Also, like, sex is mentioned and not always negatively, unlike the Bible, right? There's actually some like eros in the Quran. There's not the sort of constant shaming of the body and of sex. It's way better. So yeah, everyone read the Quran. And Shane, yeah, frog Twitter, you guys, I think you would dig it. I think you would like the Quran. Check it out. I know they're brown. I know that's hard, but you can still become a Muslim, even if you're white. Just look at Cat Stevens.
Yeah. Who got himself on like an FBI watch list as soon as he became Muslim.
Because I think he was hanging out with actual terrorists.
I
think so. Yeah,
but he wrote Peace Train. Come on.
Well, to them, they're not. To him, they're not terrorists.
Yeah.
They're freedom fighters.
Yeah, I hope somebody takes that rant and puts it on TikTok with the Andrew Tate music behind you.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
Andrew Tate is another example of the Eurasianist strategy.
Yep.
Because he's kind of like, yeah, he's pro-Russian, but now he's Muslim and lives in Eastern Europe.
The Eastern European webcam pimp to Muslim traditionalist anti-imperialist pipeline.
What is the disposition of his case now? I sort of lost track. Is he
has been charged
formally? Oh, that's right.
Formally charged, yeah.
He's been charged, but he's out of jail, right?
I think so, yeah.
Out on bail?
He's back in jail, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
But he's facing heavy charges, right?
No, yeah, he's serious rape charges and serious kidnapping charges. Yeah.
Right. I will pretty much guarantee that they're false. That Andrew Tate, even though I have zero good things to say about the dude, I'm just quite sure he didn't rape anybody. But
I liked him better when he was pretending to be a bad person as opposed to now that he's pretending to be a good person.
Yeah. Well, he's come out with statements condemning two things recently. Cooking. I don't know if you saw that.
Wow.
Cooking is for tards and fags or whatever.
Well, probably just the pores.
For what?
The pores.
Oh, yeah, and the pores, yeah. And the other thing that is just for total losers, according to Andrew Tate, is reading. He said, no, just read it. There's a tweet. But I kind of like that. It's just funny. But imagine giving that guy money to get life advice.
Yeah, I don't know.
Which apparently like several million young men have done. All right, what's next?
Well, one last thing on the riots. I just wanted to highlight this article in Compact. Malcolm K. Ewan.
I forget how it's pronounced. He's speaking of, he's an interesting case. He's a black guy. He's a black Swedish guy.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
There is one out there.
Yep. But, actually, one of my friends from high school, Damon Frost, shout out to Damon, is the leading hip hop dancer in Sweden.
Wow.
There's a thing there. There's a whole like black culture underground in Sweden.
But this article, it highlights basically his theory that a lot of this has to do with food insecurity, resulting from rising energy costs, basically, and inflation with food prices. But, the giant energy costs from this last winter, basically putting a lot of migrants into a state of food insecurity. And then that's like the easiest predictor of violent riots is lack of food.
Not true. Okay. It sounds a little more, and I like Malcolm's work. Generally, I love Compact, but I think, and this might have something to do with it. I'm sure it has something to do with it. But listen, if you want to find the cause of urban riots in Europe and America over the last 200 years, there's really only one, pretty much, which is the cops killing black people and brown people. Overwhelmingly the cause of riots, certainly in the United States. Was there a major riot in the modern U.S. that did not originate in response to cop killing? I can't think of one. Well, there were some race riots during World War II, World War I, but the cops were very much involved in those. Anyway, and the thing about France, and I really, really recommend this. I loved this movie when I saw it. I think it will hold up, but it was a really important movie in sort of French history. And then the pronunciation sucks here, but la haine, it's the hate, la Haine. It's a hard thing to pronounce for an Anglo like me. It's a depiction of life in the banlieues, the suburbs that ring Paris, that are full of the black and brown migrants and their children. And that movie's like at least 20 years old, and it shows a couple of things. First, how much black American culture has infiltrated the French working class and the migrant working class, in particular. French youth, black and white and brown, are really into hip hop. And that's why there's actually a lot of really great French rappers these days. We don't really listen to them because we don't understand the lyrics. That was number one. Number two is, and this still holds true very much among the migrants. In fact, even more so in those suburbs, because there's more of them than 20 years ago. There's more migrants living in France now, and in Paris in particular. They hate the cops because apparently the cops are pretty brutal in ways that American cops were in the 1960s when they were all white forces in major cities that were recently made black, like in Los Angeles, which wasn't black at all until the 1950s. So by the 1960s in LA, you had an all white force, patrolling these giant all black neighborhoods for the first time. And what you might expect to happen happened. And because of that, we got riots. So that's just a recipe for disaster. And that's the way that, as I understand it, the Banlieues have been policed for a long time. Largely white police force beaten up on these brown and black kids, many of whom are, in fact, petty criminals or worse. There's no doubt about it. But that, I'm sure, is the real cause of this. It's always in response to the cops killing a kid. And there's a video. Anytime there's video of a cop killing, you can pretty much guarantee there's going to be a riot that night, right? Think about all the ones in the United States. I mean, the reason we had the great racial reckoning of 2020 was that somebody took video of George Floyd getting killed, although he wasn't actually killed by the cop. I have been convinced since about the second week of that case that he did not die at all from what the cop did. He died from fentanyl overdosing and very bad health in general. But yeah. So, it's interesting that France and Paris in particular, I'd say Paris especially, has kind of followed a similar path as the United States on this. The difference is that they're further behind in the historical progression. As I said, they're sort of like they're in the 60s, right? We've moved ahead. We've done all sorts of things to deal with our race problem. They haven't yet. They're still insisting that these people just become French. Mm-hmm. That's it. They need them to be French to assimilate. And that's why people like Mbappe speak perfect French. And I believe with so-called correct accents. I believe that black and brown people in France, by and large, speak like white people because they're taught that way, to speak that way. And the schools are much more rigid and disciplinarian and authoritarian. And it's just a more authoritarian society. And the state has much more power over people's lives in France. Mm-hmm. And a lot of that is directed at the immigrants to force them to become fucking French. So I believe that's it. The cause is French egalitarian politics, forcing assimilation onto people, thereby causing discrimination against not just Islam, but all the cultures of the people from Africa and the Middle East. And the policing in France, which needs to catch up with the United States. And because we don't actually kill very many black and brown people anymore, believe it or not. I used to think we did, but it's almost none these days. It's only 10 unarmed black people per year are killed by the police in this country. And if you look at those cases, each of those 10, if you read them, even there are often cases where, the guy was like charging at the cops, trying to hit them. And there was eyewitnesses too. It's very hard to find a really clear-cut cop killing that's not legitimate. But in France, they clearly have not gotten there yet. So, I think the economic precarity of Europe, not just France recently, which has been brought on largely by the sanctions against Russia, largely because of the Ukraine war, largely because these countries have been giving half their damn treasury to Ukraine, sure, is going to exacerbate those tensions and those feelings. But the base of it, I have to believe, I don't know, don't live there, I'm not French, but I have to believe, knowing some of the history, is rooted in those key dynamics out there in the banlieue, in the suburbs of France.
Yeah.
Paris.
Cool. So this Dowdy decision.
Yeah, man.
Yeah. He's a district court judge.
That's my dude. He's a Trump appointee. I'm trying to think. He's made a bunch of decisions that are all really good, I think. And but I can't remember. I can't remember the other ones. But I think maybe about election. I think he might have been the only judge in the country who was willing to like even entertain the election fraud case. But yeah, so he's ruled that it is unconstitutional and thereby illegal for the government to, I believe, I haven't read the decision, but I've read about it. I mean, have even any contact at all, essentially, with the social media.
Yeah.
Beautiful.
So the splitting of hairs on this, I think, is that they can't ask people to censor. I think the opening is that if there's if there's a quote unquote national security or a crime threat, then, you know, the FBI can intervene and say, hey, there's a crime happening. And so I've got some video clips of like MSNBC saying, well, that still means that they can talk about election interference. That still means that they can talk about vaccines, because if you don't say the right thing about vaccines, that kills people, you know, blah, 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 blah. But it does greatly limit what the FBI can do.
Wow. Yeah. Everybody's saying, though, that it's going to get struck down, overturned. And I don't know the politics of the courts well enough to know, but I mean, it seems like it, since the entire establishment is completely against this. I mean, I just cannot believe it. Who is for freedom anymore in this country? I mean, this is really basic stuff. The government expressing its desires to the national media. How does that comport with the First Amendment, guys? You think Jefferson had that in mind? Really? When he wrote that? I mean, are you serious? I don't know.
But yeah, here's this Ryan Riley character who I believe, he rose to prominence basically writing a book tracking down January 6th protesters.
Yeah, he's the one who did the FBI's job for it.
Yeah.
And went around the country, and he fingered all these people who were at the January 6th riots or protests who are now going to do decades in prison. That guy, wow. What do I say about that man? A journalist, independent. Well, he works for NBC, I think. A journalist who does the job of the FBI, having political dissidents imprisoned. Imagine that. Speaking of journalists not being all in favor of the First Amendment, I mean, this guy, Ryan Riley, Reilly. Yeah, I saw him. He was on, what was it? Somewhere on, I saw the clip of him.
Let me show it to you right now.
Yeah.
Through kind of the parameters of this injunction.
Yeah, I mean, so it basically has some limits on what exactly the FBI, I think, most essentially is able to do. And I think that, you know, you have to take a step back and acknowledge what the reality is about how the FBI has been interacting with this. And just look at January 6th itself, for example, right? It's not as though the FBI has been going in and saying, hey, take down this post, hey, take down this post. That's what they're alleging, but there's just not a lot of evidence to support that. And basically, we've had a situation where some politicians are making any contact between social media companies and the FBI or law enforcement seem problematic in some way. And if you look at the reality, it's like the FBI is not very good at monitoring social media. Just look at what happened on January 6th. There are all of these warning signs, red flags going up all over the place, and they weren't prepared. They didn't do enough. They did not take proper precautions or instruct other law enforcement agencies to take proper precautions. So I think that that's the framework you have to remember that this is important to look by. I mean, this opinion, this 155-page opinion, starts off with essentially a big if true comment. It says, okay, if these things are true, this is one of the biggest First Amendment abuses in American history. And I suppose so, if it were true, but that's not necessarily where the facts are lining up with and what exactly the evidence shows that social media companies, how they were interacting with at least the FBI.
Danny, I wonder, when you were in law school, if you started off one of your arguments with, if this is true.
Is there a lower form of life? I don't think so. I mean, maybe, okay, a vice cop. That would be the only thing worse than Ryan Riley. But then again, he speaks for the whole liberal class, doesn't he? The whole liberal political class.
The hall monitor class.
The hall monitors, our rulers. Yeah, he does. Every one of them agrees with him. Every one of them wants more control of the media by government, for sure.
Yeah. I mean, Glenn Greenwald has been great on this, in that he's been tracking what the New York Times has been saying. And like, the New York Times used to be some of the journalists who broke the first stories about the surveillance state during the Bush years and tracking the Patriot Act and how the security apparatus was being built. And now they're explicitly in favor of it. And anytime somebody tries to limit what the FBI can do, the New York Times is there to criticize them. Yeah.
This is the real story that Glenn Greenwald has been talking about probably more than anyone. Matt Welch talks about it a lot, that I raised earlier. The real story here underneath all of this stuff is the complete corruption of mainstream journalism. That there is simply no one that I'm aware of working in any of the mainstream outlets who is critical in any meaningful way of the establishment. And, I do think that's new because, you did have back in the 70s and 80s, you did have some people. Matt Welch used to work for the LA Times, for instance. And there were reporters for the New York Times and others. The LA Times actually had some pretty damn decent reporters, even on foreign policy back then. You had some reporters for the New York Times in the 70s and 80s, not on foreign policy, most importantly, but on certainly other issues where they would be somewhat, skeptical of the official line, but not anymore. I mean, it doesn't exist anymore. And it's the complete Sovietization, as I said, of the American media. And that's what we need to be focused on and thinking about and working to correct, which we're doing. You and I are doing that right now. And everyone should be doing this. Everyone should be engaged in alt media all the time, either as a consumer or a producer. And if you have any inclination to do something like this, just do it. It takes very little money, very little time to set it up. And who knows, people will watch your videos and get information that way. I mean, I'm often getting key information about stuff when I'm doing research from very small YouTube channels and podcasts. I've gotten a lot of crucial information from those small outlets, very small outlets. So, yeah, I mean, that's the only thing we can do is just create our own parallel media universe, which we've been doing a damn good job of, all of us, for the last 10 or so years. I mean, it's one of the most important, I would say, I'll say this, the creation of the alternative media in the United States in the 21st century is one of the greatest and most important social movements in American history and in world history. It has absolutely changed the way we all live. It has changed the way we do politics. It is largely responsible for the election of Donald Trump, whether you like it or not. But whether you like it or not, there's no doubt that was a radical break from the past. And we keep growing. Alt media keeps growing and growing, and the establishment keeps getting more and more nervous and trying to throw bombs at us. I don't know if people can remember at the beginning of the pandemic, there was a full court attack, full court press on the alt media, and they were talking about censoring podcasts. They still every once in a while do. They were very mad at Joe Rogan, of course, but they wanted to censor all of us, everybody sort of in that universe, censor us because of COVID misinformation and Russia misinformation. And so the thing is, since that time, since early 2020, when they were saying all that, alt media is X amount bigger. I mean, I can name off the top of my head like 5 shows that I watched that I didn't watch then. I mean, that are big, like huge shows that I watched then, didn't even know about then. So we're winning, and we keep winning, and we keep getting bigger, and they keep getting smaller in comparison. So it's going to be interesting to see what the final showdown is. I think there will be sort of a final showdown or series of showdowns between the legacy media and the alt media. I do think they'll come after us and try to censor us directly on our podcasts and on Rumble. They're going to figure out some way to do that, and then we're going to have a fight, and then we're going to win. And then who knows what world we'll be living in. Yeah, that's how it is.
Well, on the alt media tip, one of the original progenitors of alt media, the Young Turks, are almost completely out of line with the left now. Anna-Kasparian for the left.
That's an overstatement.
I know.
That's a huge overstatement. They're still very left.
They are themselves left, but
aren't they just on a few issues they're skeptical? And not all it is.
It's funny. Aaron McIntyre calls them neocons now. Like there's because basically they support the modern narrative on a lot of things, but because they are splitting on woke ideology in a couple small ways, but key ways, they're losing their woke base of support. And so, Anna-Kasparian for the last 3 months has been saying things that would put her in the TERF camp, and basically just going out against the most vocal radical trans activists and the things that they say about women and saying, I don't like that.
Right.
And apparently that, you can't be in the left anymore if you're not completely on board with being called a birthing hole.
Right. And I think she's even mostly criticized the trans movement for its tactics,
yes,
not necessarily the basic ideological basis of it. Right. I think she still accepts that gender is a social construct and you can choose your gender, I think. Maybe I'm wrong about that, but it's more, she's just angry about all the aggressiveness of the trans movement, which none of us like.
Mhm.
But maybe she's issued some other skepticisms about it too. The other thing that she and Cenk are both skeptical of is affirmative action. Lo and behold, this is, I think, a new position for them. And they've been pretty powerful on this and talked about how it essentially promotes stereotypes. People walk around these universities assuming that every black kid there is there for one reason only, which is largely true. They've said this. The Young Turks, Cenk and Anna, have said this, and that it's, horrendous discrimination against Asians, which it is. Man, you want to talk about some Jim Crow shit. These poor, this is the real new Jim Crow. It's against Asians trying to get their kids into school. I mean, a culture that values education more than anything else, right? These people, and they start from poverty. They come over here on boats often. They start a business in the hood. All of it, they work night and day, 7 days a week for decades, all of which was to get their kids into the best school in the country. They managed to do that. The kid gets straight A's, perfect SAT scores, does after school community service, and gets denied from Harvard because they need to have more black kids. I mean, and they have too many Asians. And of course, every liberal description of the Supreme Court case doesn't mention this. I don't know if you noticed that, but the mainstream press, when they talked about this Supreme Court case, doesn't mention Asians at all, even though the case was brought by Asians. It was brought by Asian families who sued the government, basically sued the UNC and Harvard. But that is just outright rank racism and discrimination against a group of people. And not just that, a group of people who, as I said, overcame incredible adversity and did exactly what you're supposed to do in America, which is to make money, have a family, support your family, and advance your children so that they can become productive members of society. I mean, have the Asians not done that perfectly as a group? Of course they have. And to then deny them that dream for racist reasons, just can't believe it. How come the New York Times doesn't talk about that?
Yeah.
I wonder.
One note on that affirmative action case. I had my suspicions last week, but there's an article on Mises.org, and Brian McClanahan covered it himself, that this case is a victory for conservatives, but you're still losing the war, in that it was decided on grounds of the 14th Amendment. Like, if they wanted to, all they would have to say is these are institutions that receive federal funding under the Civil Rights Act of 1964. If you receive federal funding, you can't discriminate. End of case. But they went all the way back to the 14th Amendment and said, well, actually, it's the federal government's job to ensure equality under the law. So we are stepping in and overriding these institutions. And so it is like an encroachment on the federal government here under the 14th Amendment.
That's a huge point that I totally missed. I did assume that they were going to rule according to the Civil Rights Act, but I guess they didn't.
No, yeah.
You're right. I remember now. It was a 14th Amendment ruling. That's right. Right. Maintaining, we talked about this in France, but there is a strain, it's just less of one in the America, that strain of egalitarianism that the progressives introduced after the Civil War.
Yeah.
Right. 14th Amendment was part of Reconstruction, basically, which was the first progressive project. It was one of the biggest progressive projects too, but the 14th Amendment was part of that. And what it does is it tries to smuggle in these Rousseauian French egalitarian ideas into the U.S. Constitution. It's really what it is. I mean, in my view, and I think in the view of a lot of legal scholars, but it certainly does sort of put this egalitarianism inside the Constitution.
Yeah.
Or at the very least, the Supreme Court in its current form interprets it as such, right? And that's the problem. We don't want that. We don't want the government making us equal, because next thing you know, they're going to make us all the same.
Yeah.
Just like they're trying to do in France.
Because like, if Harvard wants to be racist, let Harvard be racist. Just don't go to Harvard.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Of course. Yeah, the Civil Rights Act is pretty good, actually. I'm essentially for it. Oh no, I guess I'm not for it. No, I take it back. I take Rand Paul's position.
Mm-hmm.
There's no reason for it.
There's a couple clauses in there. Yeah, but the stuff
there's no good reason for it.
Okay.
It's just that it's enforced completely hypocritically.
Yeah.
It's only enforced to move blacks up the scale and to, equalize things between whites and blacks, essentially. But yeah, the civil rights movement act is like completely useless. Why would you want to patronize a racist store, racist business if you're a black person?
Yeah.
Why on earth would you want to go in there? If a Klansman runs the place, you want to do business with them? The market does work itself out here. I mean, libertarians have an awesome argument on this. I think it's pretty unassailable. Let the market work it out.
Yeah, constitutional conservatives and the right in general, if they're really serious, I think their number one issue should be abolishing the 14th Amendment.
Ooh, damn.
Yeah.
Is their critique similar to mine, that it's egalitarian in nature?
Yeah, that it's basically, if you have the 14th Amendment and that's a brand new constitution that's completely antithetical to the original constitution, it expands the federal government to rule over all the states and all businesses. Yeah, and it forces an egalitarian liberal worldview on the world. So as long as the 14th Amendment is being used, the liberals win.
How do they feel about the 13th Amendment?
Oh, the 13th?
Slavery. That's what the left winger would immediately say.
Yeah.
Oh, some Southern historian named Brian McClanahan wants to do away with the 14th Amendment. Okay, is that because he wants to do away with the 13th Amendment too?
Yeah. The hard left doesn't like the 13th Amendment because it allows for slavery in prisons. Yep. So abolish that too,
Right. Well, right. Oh, nice. Well done.
Yeah.
Fuck the Bill of Rights.
Yeah.
Let's get rid of all of it. I mean, I wonder what the effect would be. Be interesting to measure this. I don't know if anyone ever has, but the actual de facto breadth of speech in Europe versus the de facto breadth of speech in America. Like, is their Overton window actually smaller than ours because they don't have a First Amendment and they have all sorts of speech laws there? I wonder. I don't know. A whole lot of radical ass professors and philosophers and performers have come out of Europe, more radical than what we have. So I don't know. I mean, I don't know if you actually need the First Amendment or if the First Amendment actually does produce what you want, which is just a free intellectual society. I don't know. I mean, Paris is known famously for its crazy intellectuals who will say anything. So I don't know. And they have never had a First Amendment.
Yeah. There's a long constitutional tangent I could go on there.
And the Second Amendment.
Second Amendment.
You enforce with your gun.
Yeah.
Not with the government.
Just have a gun.
Yeah, that's the Second Amendment. It's the Second Amendment in your hand.
Yep.
That's right. And a 3D printer.
Yes.
Then there is no gun control. There can't be. Awesome.
Yeah. Well, so there's a bag of cocaine in the White House.
I love that.
Yeah.
I just, it's about time. God, I love that. This is really one of my favorite news stories. Although, I mean, there is a tinge of sadness because, I've had a past as an addict of alcohol. And so I do know what it's like in some way. Never been addicted to Coke. But I do, part of me, I suppose, is sympathetic to Hunter. And he's not the actual president. He himself has never done much. He's never had any power over me. So, I don't love that he was grifting off of his dad and using the state power accrued by his dad to make himself rich. But I don't celebrate. I don't have schadenfreude about Hunter Biden. I'm a little bit sad. I mean, he's clearly got a massive problem. If he can't even control himself to the point where he has to bring Coke into the fucking White House. Well, that he has to live in the White House from the first place. He's living in the White House. Yeah. And has anyone explained that? Like,
well, there are some videos of him like.
Oh, there is that one. Yeah.
Yeah.
He ducks behind his mom and dad, and you can see him like do this or something with his nose.
Yeah.
Yeah. Has anyone I haven't heard any explanation for why he lives there now. I mean, he's got plenty of money. He can live anywhere.
Well, I guess Probably, so he's not on a bender with whores and cocaine.
To be under
and
control, I
under-
assume. I mean,
yeah.
I would assume they had like Secret Service on his ass, 24/7.
Yeah.
But-
Probably to keep his mouth shut too, because I mean that guy films every crime he commits, and he talks very, very loosely. And
Man,
I do like how he talks to his lawyer, though.
This is why the media is just bending all the way over backwards to like dissemble about it. First it was found in like, what was it?
Well,
They've changed the location.
Here's how the story was first reported. Yeah. A mysterious white substance was found in the White House.
Right.
So they were basically trying to scare us into thinking it was anthrax at first.
Right.
And then they're like, oh, we tested it. It's not lethal. And then now it's a bag of cocaine. And according to Vice News, it could be anybody's bag of cocaine. You know that there's 5 million cocaine users in America. So that could have been anybody's cocaine.
No, one of them said that the recent location, the location that they now think it was found in, is where visitors frequent.
Yeah.
Visitors to the White House, like, people off the streets, during the tours. It's like, oh, okay. Yeah, no, that's it. For sure. One of the tourists, dropped a bag of coke on the floor of the White House.
Like Flava Flav on Yo MTV Raps.
Goodness gracious. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. Well, so, I mean, this is going to be, I think, one of the more damaging news items for Biden in the election. I think this is going to really hurt him.
I mean, I guess just because Americans run on tabloids that.
Yeah. When Americans care about this kind of thing.
A physical bag of cocaine is probably going to affect the election.
I mean, there is, it does actually, for the first time ever, feel like the U.S. government is somewhat losing control. I mean, it is. I mean, because you have a guy who's obviously dysfunctional at the head of it, and then the number 2 is not much better. And you have the military introducing all these woke measures, which make no sense for a military to do, and our military readiness is declining as a result of that. And because we're all obese and, we're losing war after war now. We essentially lost the Iraq war. We certainly lost the Afghanistan war, and we're about to lose the Ukraine war. Yeah, which we are fighting, which is our war, in Vietnam. I mean, this is bad, and not to mention the economy. $30 trillion in debt. I mean, just name those facts, and like, you're going to want to run for the exits, I think. I mean, that's scary. I am actually scared to be living in this country right now because of that set of facts. I mean, it sure seems to be a big balloon about to pop.
Well, the reason why I brought up this story is just like the media's attitude about drugs and how much that's changed and the way they're framing it.
There you go.
So this was CNN right now. This is how they were reporting on it.
On that, it was suspected. The field test said cocaine. Yeah. Now these more conclusive lab tests. Yeah.
I would like to know blow by blow who was responsible for this.
Too soon.
There's no too soon on this. No one was injured, as far as we know. And it's an illicit drug at the White House. Why can't you actually have a bit of fun with it?
I don't believe in fun.
No, he doesn't. Thank you so much for joining us, everyone.
Oh, my God. I didn't see that before. That's awesome. Was that real?
Yeah. Like it's morning zoo, daytime TV or whatever.
They're making fun of cocaine.
Yeah.
They're joking about cocaine. Blow by blow. And then what'd she say? Something about let's have a little fun. What's wrong with having a little fun?
Yeah, it's an illicit drug at the White House.
I agree.
Yeah, it's like Snoop Dogg smoking weed with Obama. It's.
I completely agree. So legalize this shit. That's the point that should be made right now, right?
Penn Jillette had a really good rant back when he was a libertarian. Oh, yeah. Penn Jillette had a really good rant back when he was a libertarian about Obama making the media tours and saying, back in college, I did some weed and a little bit of blow, and pretending to be the cool president when he's the guy going after dispensaries. He's the guy locking people up and making people do hard, serious time under his laws for drugs. And Hunter Biden being the son of the author of the '94 crime bill is pretty damning on this one.
God, that's right.
Yeah.
I somehow forgot that aspect of the story. That's right. Yeah. So no, I mean, if it's so I strongly support Hunter Biden, and I would like to extend to all Americans the privileges that he enjoys, which is that he'll get away with this.
Yeah.
Yep.
And I would like to buy one of his paintings too.
I haven't really seen them. Any good?
I don't know. They're no Hitler, but they're up there.
Are they interesting? Are they pretty? Are they better than George Bush's paintings?
I haven't seen Hunter Biden's paintings actually, but
okay.
Yeah.
We should do a comparison of the two.
Yeah. George Bush, Hunter Biden, Hitler. Just a little
right.
Yeah.
There you go. That would be an interesting exhibition. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, what else do we have? Anything?
Oh, just on this angle, one more thing is that they're spinning the Hunter Biden story to. This has been going on for a long time, but to be sympathetic, like, oh, Joe Biden has a drug addict son, and everybody in America has a drug addict son, and it's really all about a father's love. So this was the View a week ago, and I think, again, as the details about the corruption keep coming out and are unignorable, this is the spin they're putting on it.
The Hunter Biden story, the scandal, the this, the that, it's also the story of a father's love. And Joe Biden has never and will never give up on his son Hunter, and will never treat him lesser than. And so he is a father first. Take it or leave it.
Oh, that was a quick one.
Sorry.
Yeah.
I had to fix something. No, it's amazing. I love this generosity, this open-heartedness of all these liberals, about drugs, because for so long they were really busy writing drug laws and putting lots of people in prison for them.
Yeah.
So I'm glad they've had this. They've opened their hearts, to us addicts, and I appreciate that. They no longer want to punish us. Thank you. So let's go. Let's legalize the powders. Let's go, Portugal.
Yeah. If you remember Kamala Harris pretending to listen to Snoop Dogg and smoke weed in college.
That was delicious.
And she was in college before Doggy Style dropped. So
I went to high school with her.
Yeah.
I mean, we were the same age. Yeah. No, I promise you there was no Snoop Dogg in high school or Tupac.
Yeah.
Because Tupac was in high school at the time, or not even. I think he was in junior high.
Yeah.
He's from here. So wait, we got the big story to talk about.
Yeah. So this movie, Sound of Freedom, is making the rounds. Tim Pool is raving about it. Jordan Peterson had the filmmaker on, correct?
Yeah. Yes. Well, it's about him. No, the guy it's about.
Tom Ballard, the guy who started Operation Underground Railroad.
Peterson had on his show Jim Caviezel, who plays
Tom Ballard. Okay.
Tim Ballard. And Tim Ballard was also on his show. They were on the show together. And Tim Ballard is the head of this group called Operation Underground Railroad, which has been together for, I think, about 10 years, which says that it rescues children who have been sold into sex slavery. And he says he is, although this has not been confirmed, but he says he's a former special agent for the Department of Homeland Security, and that he left that job to fight against the evil of child sex slavery, which it certainly is an evil. The thing is that Tim Ballard and Operation Underground Railroad are almost certainly a fraud. And there is quite a lot of evidence for that. It's not just fraudulent, but it's worse. They've given lots and lots of money to law enforcement agencies in the United States and in the third world, who then use that money to conduct stings to entrap men into thinking they're purchasing sex work, then busting those men. That also leads the money that Operation Underground Railroad has given to law enforcement around the world also mostly has led to raids on brothels that have produced a whole lot of prostitutes in chains. These are, of course, adult prostitutes. They call them trafficking victims. They conflate prostitution with trafficking. Everything becomes trafficking, even when it's two consenting adults choosing to exchange money for sex. They label that trafficking, and they'll lock you up and they'll lock her up for it. Even if she's a victim, so-called, of trafficking, they often arrest the victims of human trafficking, which sort of tells you how dishonest they are and what they think of these women that they claim to be saving. But Tim Ballard and Operation Underground Railroad go into countries. They have these raid and rescue operations where they go in paramilitary style in third world countries and kick down the doors of brothels, arrest the brothel owner. They also arrest, essentially, all the women working there. And then guess what they do? They hand them over to the local law enforcement, who then either put them in prison, or with the women, this is very common in places like Thailand and Cambodia and Vietnam, they put the women in these special reformatories, which are prisons for prostitutes, where they teach them how to cook and clean and sew and raise children and be a good, dutiful mother. And they keep them there until they've learned those lessons. That's what Operation Underground Railroad has done. And then in this country, as I said, they've given lots of money to law enforcement agencies, especially in Utah. Tim Ballard is a Mormon, and he said that his mission is derived from his Mormon faith. They gave hundreds of thousands of dollars to the several counties in Utah to conduct these stings against prostitutes. Well, they call it sex traffickers. And amazingly, the Attorney General of Utah then conducted an investigation of Operation Underground Railroad because they were claiming credit for all these operations that the Utah police were doing against prostitution, when in fact Operation Underground Railroad had nothing to do with it. All they did was give them money to help them with it. So there's just various kinds of fraud going on here, and lots of inflation and then the way that they talk about it. Okay, so if you're unaware, if you haven't studied the QAnon phenomenon, you won't know this, but anytime you hear the word adrenochrome, that means it's a QAnon thing. That's a QAnon thing. It's a belief that there's this drug that's somehow derived from adrenaline called adrenochrome that is inside of children, and that these sex traffickers working around the globe are kidnapping these kids and either enslaving them as sex slaves or conducting vivisection on them and harvesting their organs and drawing the adrenochrome out of their bodies and then selling it on the market, on the black market. That's what these people believe. That's what they say is going on.
Well, that's just a riff on the well-known fact that Hillary Clinton eats Mexican babies.
So here's the thing. Speaking of Hillary Clinton, here's the thing, my right-wing brothers and sisters. I love you. You're being played hard again. This is your latest Eliza Blue. Tim Ballard is the next Eliza Blue. Guess where this whole effort to conflate prostitution with trafficking in order to simply combat prostitution, consensual adult activity, that's what this is all about, by the way. Those are the only people who have been affected by any of this, is adult prostitutes and their customers. The person who began this campaign to conflate those things and to go after prostitution under a new guise, who marshaled the resources of the federal government of the United States to do this particular thing, which it had never done before, going after these alleged sex traffickers, was none other than Hillary Rodham Clinton when she was Secretary of State under Obama. She created an entire office, a department within the State Department. It has a website, you can look it up, devoted to combating human trafficking around the globe. And to this day, the State Department of the United States, they pour money, big money into this, and they have agents all around the world helping people like Tim Ballard bust adults who are choosing to sell sex. The good news is that there are very big movements in a lot of these countries, in Thailand, Cambodia, and especially in India, of sex workers who say, we want rights, not rescue. They march in the streets, thousands of women at a time, especially in India. You'll see these huge marches. It's amazing. They denounce these Western do-gooders who come into their countries and fuck them up. And they say, no, we want just the rights that everyone else has to sell whatever we want. We don't want you white boys coming in with your tactical gear and doing a white savior thing for us. Thank you very much, which ends up just putting us in jail anyway. So the whole thing is not just a fraud. It is very, very damaging and dangerous, and has done tremendous damage to very vulnerable people all around the world when they claim to be saving them. I wouldn't be surprised if they haven't saved a single child from sex slavery. And by the way, there sure is sex slavery. Oh yeah, in India, as a matter of fact, in Mumbai, I don't know if it's still there, but for decades and decades, there was a 1 mile square red light district that was surrounded by barbed wire, that within it had hundreds or thousands of prostitutes, many of whom were children, and many of whom were boys, young boys, who had had their genitals cut, their testicles cut off because they were made into eunuchs, which is like, there's a market demand for eunuchs, boys in India for some reason. Yes, sex. And a lot of the women, a lot of the girls, the little girls who were sold there were sold into that by their families so that they could, eat because of the poverty in South Asia. So yes, child sex slavery sure as hell does happen, but Operation Underground Railroad has done nothing to alleviate it. And all it's done is made life much, much harder for adult people who choose to exchange sex for work, for money.
Well, man, I don't want to explicitly draw a line to the Eliza Blue story, but there is a parallel here. There is a parallel here.
Same industry. Same industry.
Yeah. In that this guy, Tim Ballard, has in the past taken responsibility or exaggerated claims of survivors who escaped on their own and sort of taking credit for them.
That's right.
And yeah, so I mean, I think the biggest thing he's doing is just money laundering and essentially getting Republicans who are worked up by QAnon and by their own pornographic fantasies.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, think about it. Like, it's like, okay, so the idea of a child, like a little girl being a sex slave, like that is the most appalling, abhorrent thing any of us can imagine. Then imagine that you could go save that girl.
Yeah.
Right. Oh my God. You want to talk about savior fantasies, which many men, including me, have had. Like, I've had all kinds of savior fantasies. I've been accused.
And imagine you yourself don't have to do any dirty work. All you have to do is just give this guy money and you're saving the world. Yeah.
Just click purchase.
Yeah.
Purchase that OUR t-shirt and swag and your camo trucker hat with the crossed rifles on it that says Operation Underground Railroad.
Goes great with your Punisher School tee.
Totally. Yeah. Jesus Christ, I hate these people. I don't hate these people. Well, the thing is, Jordan Peterson is all up on it. He loves it. He's been tweeting hard about it. And he had them on the show. I think he did a 2-hour show with them. And he was just completely, really, I don't even know. This sounds terrible. We need to do something about this. And Tim Pool tweeting about it, talking about what an amazing movie. The problem is apparently it's actually a good movie. Like, I think it's probably really well made. The production values are high.
I heard about it first through Glenn Beck because I like Glenn Beck a little bit, but
I like him now too, but he does Operation Nazarene, which is the same thing as OUR.
Yeah.
And that they know each other, and Tim Ballard has worked with Glenn Beck, which was really heartbreaking because Beck he's gotten so much better on so many issues over the years, but this is just problematic.
But I did want to say that it is sad that because Christian filmmaking has come a really, really long way. I think Nefarious might have been the best movie of last year. Well, 2022 was a good year for movies, but Nefarious was an incredible movie.
Really?
Or actually, it came out in February this year is when I saw it. But yeah, it's a horror movie about a theologically sound and consistent demon. So you have the plot is you have an atheist psychiatrist assessing a serial killer for insanity because they're going to execute him. And so if he's crazy, you can't execute him. But this guy claims to be possessed by a demon. So it's just a sit-down conversation between the serial killer and the psychiatrist, kind of like Silence of the Lambs. And for 2 hours, they go back and forth about it. And you wouldn't even know it was a Christian movie until like the last 20 minutes. It's that well done.
So one of the things I have not liked about this sort of resurgent neo on the right in recent years is the increased use of demonology. So calling political enemies demons, for instance, calling trans people and gay people demons, and calling the Biden family demons and Democrats demons. And I mean, And some of them seem to mean this. Like they seem to think that there are certain people who are actually fundamentally evil. Like they traffic very easily in this notion of evil, which I think is not a great move.
I think there's a theologically sound and smarter way to do it when you're talking about possession. And Jordan Peterson was hinting at this too. He likes to quote Jung in that ideas don't have, people don't have ideas, ideas have people. And so a lot of times when people are sort of NPCs, like you can use like the Matrix terminology, they're plugged into the Matrix, they're Agent Smith, they're repeating the lines of the hive mind. Right. So in the same way, you can trace that back thousands of years to notions about evil. And you know, if it sounds like somebody's running off of a script that you've heard before, chances are their thoughts aren't their own and their consciousness is coming from somewhere else.
It sounds too much like Sam Harris and his attack on agency.
Oh, it's not agency necessarily. I mean, it's tough, but oh man.
Well,
yeah.
But then there's Foucault,
yeah,
who often suggests that our thoughts are really in a continuum with the thoughts that are circulating in the culture. So that in other words, there's no separation, there's no clean separation between the individual and society.
Yeah.
Right. So it sort of sounds like with Foucault, he almost agrees with those guys.
Dang.
That we don't entirely control. We're not entirely autonomous when we're choosing our thoughts. Right. Like how much of our choosing of thoughts is determined by the society around us that we live in. And clearly it's a lot, because if you look at the way that an American speaks compared to the way a Yemeni would speak, you know, you'll see all sorts of differences. And obviously those are cultural. But then again, how much agency, how much choice do we have when we're, again, choosing our thoughts, right? Sam Harris says none.
Yeah.
And it sounds like your boy here says none too.
The demonology, the Christian worldview about demonology is that you voluntarily, piece by piece, sacrifice your will voluntarily to the demon. Like you allow yourself to be seduced, and you know, it's like the trope of you know, selling your soul to the devil. It's like you did this because you wanted something from it in return. The demon promised you power, you know, he promised you pleasure, he promised you an escape or something.
Right.
Yeah. But what you said about Foucault is interesting, because Jeff Schoenberger has written about the parallels of Foucault and Girard in terms of what they say about violence. But that comports with Girard's mimetic theory very, very well, in that our desires and thoughts are basically the collectives, and we have to work to get out of that.
We're going to teach a course on Foucault. It's not up yet. It's not on sale yet, but that's going to be after the neoconservatism course, which is starting on Monday. And a lot of people are asking me about it. But yeah, it's going to be an amazing survey, 2 sessions on neoconservatism. And then we're going to go into what Michael's talking about here. Foucault, and I think we're going to do, maybe a course on each of his books. I think that's the best way to do this. But yeah, it's an interesting thing where that Foucault's central theory there, which is so key to the way that all postmodernists think to some extent, also kind of challenges the idea of agency. Right? Because, you know, if discourse flows through us and we then disperse it, it sounds like it's sort of like we are operating according to the discourse around us, not to our own, according to our own volition. And so that's when discourse about demons has some traction, because people feel like they're not in control of their own thoughts. And if they feel like they're not in control of their own thoughts, then they assume that there are other people who really don't control their own thoughts. And so when they see people doing really terrible things, like cutting people's heads off, like with ISIS or whatever, blowing up a cafe of people like in Paris or whatever, or dressing up like a woman when you're a man, right? The demon idea comes very easily when you don't believe in agency. Which is also, by the way, sort of Sam Harris's way of thinking. ironically, since he's so anti-religious, but he thinks in a similar way, which is that, these Muslims are walking around the desert or these brown people were walking around the desert and all of a sudden they bumped into the Quran. Well, they read it and then they were like taken by it.
Yeah.
and started blowing themselves up. That's kind of his history of Islam. And there's no agency there because he doesn't believe in it. He has an entire book arguing against agency and free will. Remarkable.
I respect him at least in that he I agree with him in that I think it's the fundamental question about philosophy. I think that's the human condition right there is free will.
Free will?
Yeah. I think that's the central question.
Certainly one central question. Yeah. Which actually Plato doesn't really talk about. I don't think that's really in Plato. One of the big questions is not actually in Plato, but certainly, yeah. So it's interesting how a lot of these very disparate seeming thinkers share a view of human beings in that it's not entirely flattering the way they think of human beings, right? I mean, it kind of sort of endlessly malleable, right? That they can be manipulated sort of infinitely, and that they're not making their own choices, their own decisions. They're not speaking their own truth. They're speaking the truth that's been given to them from outside their consciousness. And I just, my instinct is to fight that. I don't like it. And I want people to think that they have agency, even if they don't.
Yeah.
And I just think, and there's no way that these people can prove any of this stuff. You can't prove that there's no agency and no free will.
Yeah.
So why not just believe that there is?
Yeah. Man, it's complicated. Yeah. But
better politics come out of that is my point. That's all that matters, right? What politics comes out of it. So to me, if you get rid of agency and free will and you say that doesn't happen with human beings, then authoritarianism comes right in. I mean, then you got to control these people. You got to, with Sam Harris, it's scientists. It's a scientocracy. Scientists will tell us what to do. Scientists will determine what policies we should enact.
They will develop a pill. They will develop a pill to stop you from thinking bad thoughts.
Yes. I mean, almost literally, he has said that. He's talked about many magic pills that the scientists will invent that will cure this or that social ill. Right. And so and Calvinists, similarly, right? Christians and sort of the whole Calvinist all the Calvinist descendants like Paul Vanderklay, who was on our show. And I'd be interesting to talk about Paul about this. Same thing. They need some heavy-handed external coercion to keep them from going off the rails, and to keep them going in the correct path, because these human beings can be manipulated at any moment and can be sent down any path, right? You could become a fascist at any moment. You could become a Trump supporter at any moment. And then you just go down. Someone will lead you there. The left thinks about people like this too, right? It's like if you if you let a racist speak, everyone listening will become a racist. They have this very similar idea about human agency and human will, right? It's like we are just like little toys that anybody can pick up and play with and do whatever they want with them, right? Everybody is infinitely susceptible to a racist, they think. That's what leftists think. And same with the right wing. It's like if a little boy sees a drag queen, he's going to be gay. Like there's no choices going on. People don't have choices. They don't deliberate. They don't think about all the options they have, and they don't make free choices. So my point is that analysis of human beings and of the world leads directly to very authoritarian politics. Now, if you want an authoritarian politics, which much of the right wing does, they want fascism. They say it. They want Italian style fascism. Then that's your view. That works, right? But if you want a free politics, if you want a politics that allows for individual freedom and expression, then you got to embrace the idea that we actually do have free will and that human beings do have agency, even in the most restrained circumstances, even for slaves in the hold of a ship crossing the Atlantic. Even those people had agency. There were slave rebellions on those ships. There were mutinies on those ships. A lot of slavers drowned in the Atlantic Ocean because they were thrown overboard by slaves who'd been captured and were in chains. Those people had agency. So if those people had agency, then we all have agency. And I think it leads to a much better politics.
I agree with you, Thad. Slavery is a choice.
Thank you.
Yeah. But
slavery's, you missed my whole point, Weimer. I was trying to say slavery's good.
Yeah.
You weren't listening. Fuck, dude.
But the reason why I brought that up is in the art world, it's hard to have a horror movie that's really compelling, that's not just like jump scares or gore porn. Like, you're not really invested in it. So to have somebody who really, really believes in evil and to give you a sincere depiction of what that looks like to them in a way that other people would see as hokey and from the past is actually the most compelling way to make a horror movie nowadays, I think.
Totally.
Yeah.
Some of the greatest movies I've ever seen were straight up horror movies. And for that reason too. Thing is, we got to go. So we're going to Unregistered Live right now. That is after every Unreported, we hang out for an hour and a half on Zoom with every patron of Unregistered. And if you want to join us, go to patreon.com/unregistered, join up at any level, and you can click on the link that's in the comments on Patreon and you'll see us there. It's after every Unreported. And then go to unregisteredacademy.com and check out the neoconservatism course starting on Monday night. It's going to be lit. You're going to need this in all your debates on politics with your friends. So, yeah, no, we're going to unlock a whole lot of secrets about the neocons, and everyone will come away way more knowledgeable about this, about the most powerful political faction in the world, which is the neocons. All right, man. Thank you. Awesome.
Yeah, sweet.
Great work. I'll
Peace.
see you there.
See you over there.